Welcome to the lecture on South and Southeast Asia. So we'll begin with India. Now, India is a really big place. As a result, it's been really difficult to go ahead and unify the entire region. We talked about this a little bit when we looked at the Muslim world. Now, they have had some empires that unified the whole region, but it was for a short amount of time. Usually, India is broken down into several kingdoms. Reasons for this include geography, religion, and just the sheer size of the place. Now, a couple of things that characterize India is that in southern India, it'll be a lot more stable, a lot less conflict. In northern India, that's where you have the majority of the conflicts, is that's where the Delhi Sultanate comes in. Later, the Mughals will come in through the north, and you have this conflict between Muslims and Hindus that continually occurs in that area. So that's just to get an overview of what India and its politics are like during this time period of 1200 to 1450. Now, there's going to be some belief systems within India itself, and we'll go through them in this lecture. Sufism, which is a branch of Islam. We'll have the Bhakti movement, which is also a reaction to Hinduism, and of course Hinduism and Buddhism. So we'll begin with Sufism. We've talked about Sufism a few times now, and the easiest way to remember what the Sufis are, who they stood for, is that consider them like the hippies of Islam. It is more about the devotion to God and the outward expressions towards God. And the Sufis also believe that God is in everything. So, in that sense, it's less focused on the rigidity of Sharia law and the stuff that kind of Muslim scholars really focus on. As a result, Muslim scholars, the ulama, and Sufis will come into conflict from time to time as the ulama provide a more rigid a kind of structure that's used by empires, and Sufis are really out there in the frontier and converting people and focusing more on just the human relationship with God, right? That God is in everything. So it's a spiritual connection, and that it could be accomplished through ritual and prayer. Now, there is a video here that explains a little bit about Sufism and how Sufism has been used recently or is being thought of as a way to combat radical Islam. The one thing to note about this video is that you have the president of India, who is a Hindu, who is suggesting that Sufism be used in order to stop radical Islam. But remember, the president of India is a Hindu nationalist, and he really pushes forth Hindu ideas. So in this way, he believes that this is a way that maybe Hinduism and Sufism can coexist in the same place. So Hinduism, it is probably the oldest practiced religion. It comes from the Indus Valley. It is based on a series of texts that were around called the Vedas. And from there, this kind of religion got formed, right? It's polytheistic, there's many gods, but all of these gods are a part of this one big, giant, universal god called the Brahmin, right? And essentially, the Brahmin is there's a piece of Brahmin in every human, right? So the whole world is big giant soul, and there's a piece of this soul inside of all of us, right? Now, if you live your dharma, the way, the path of living your life, right? The role that was assigned for you. Uh, you're supposed to live this. This is your truth, right? And you're supposed to live this to the best possible way. Um, and doing so, when you die, you can become reincarnated since souls are immortal. You can be reincarnated, and if you went ahead and lived out your dharma and you did a good job of it, you can move up in the social hierarchy. Eventually, you can even break out of this cycle of life and death and reunite with the Brahmin, right? You can escape this. This is called moksha. Hinduism really reinforces India's caste system. Now, what is the caste system? Well, when we look at it, it's this kind of social hierarchy. So it's classes, right? All the way at the top, you have the Brahmins, which are the priests. Underneath them, you'll have the rulers, then you'll have artisans and farmers and merchants, and then you'll have manual laborers. All the way at the bottom, you have the outcasts, the untouchables, right? Those are street cleaners, people that work in cleaning up human excrement with latrines and that kind of stuff. An easy way to think about the Indian caste system is that the Brahmins, who are at the top of the pyramid, they are like the head of Brahma, of the big universal soul, right? They're the thinkers. They're the ones that kind of set forth this path. Then you have in the arms, you'll have the warriors and the rulers. They're the ones that administer. They're the ones that kind of get things done, right? Then you have the farmers and traders and merchants as the legs. So they're the ones that could start moving you in a certain direction. And then, of course, the laborers, they're the feet. So you don't necessarily need your feet to survive, but if you have a good set of feet, your life becomes a whole lot easier, right? So the laborers, the manuals, they kind of support this big social hierarchy. And like I said, all the way on the outside in are the untouchables, the outcasts, um, and that's that, right? So if you were born a manual laborer, that's what you would be. So if you were born into that caste, there was really no way for you to move out of this caste unless you lived out your dharma, you did the best you could, you were a good, awesome person, got good karma, and then maybe you can move up and become a farmer or a merchant next time around, right? And eventually, you can escape and get moksha. Usually, Brahmins were the ones that were closer to achieving this kind of goal. So it's a very rigid class system. There was no intermarriage between the castes, that was forbidden. So in a sense, it pretty much dominated society, and this influenced the part of why India is fragmented. Because if you are a manual labor, you need to pay attention to the local Brahmin and what the Brahmin's wishes are. Because if you disrespect the Brahmin, if you don't follow what the Brahmin, the thinker, is actually telling you to do, you could end up getting bad karma, and then you will never break out of your caste, or you could even go down in the caste. So therefore, you're more willing to listen to the local official, the local Brahmin, than you are to some emperor who's really far away. So that's an important thing to note with regards to how the caste system affects India and social structures. So again, big point to remember, Hinduism made it hard to centralize power in India. People are more loyal to local leaders than an emperor that's far away, right? And if you go against the Brahmin, he could bump you down uh, in the caste system. Now, the Bhakti movement. So Hinduism is very rigid, and as a result, some people start to go away from Hinduism and they'll turn to Islam. They'll go ahead and turn to Buddhism. So, as a response to people starting to kind of not want to be a part of Hinduism anymore, the religion goes through this reform phase. So as Islam is to be a Muslim basically means to surrender, right? To surrender yourself to God, devotion to God. The Bhakti movement kind of incorporates that within Hinduism. You know, that there is this path of self realization through love and devotion to God. It pushed back against this really rigid class system. It was a little bit more inclusive. You know, you wouldn't just worship one god like Vishnu or Shiva. You could worship multiple gods, right? And that you don't have to follow everything that's in the Vedas. That as long as you do something with love, it will be acceptable and you will get good karma. So, in a sense, the Bhakti movement is how we get modern Hinduism, where you still kind of have the caste system in India, but more and more people are starting to follow it less and less. You have intermarriage now between different castes and stuff like that. The Bhakti movement is the reason why Hinduism is what it is today, and it was a reaction to the growing influence of Islam, and also some of the growing influence of Buddhism as well. Though Buddhism will eventually get kind of absorbed back into Hinduism, since that's what Buddhism branched out of. Islam will never really be absorbed into Hinduism. So, Buddhism. In India, it was more of a philosophy, a way of living your life that eventually led to nirvana, which was the escape of this cycle of life and death. Very similar to moksha in Hinduism. So, Buddhism evolves from Hinduism. It's based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the first Buddha, not the only Buddha, but the first Buddha. And he himself was a Hindu. He used to live in a palace, locked away, and then one day he snuck out and he saw all the suffering in the world, and then he wanted to find some way to end this suffering. And he tried many things. He tried to be completely a pauper and everything else, but eventually he realized that the best way to live your life is to live the middle way, not at the extremes. And he laid out these teachings called the Eightfold Path that will eventually lead you to escape this life and death cycle and be free, right? And Buddhism's appeal was that one, it kind of got rid of this very rigid caste system, and instead of waiting a really long time like you would under Hinduism, before you can escape, right? In Hinduism, it might take you multiple lifetimes. Within Buddhism, you can escape this cycle in your current lifetime. You can reach enlightenment through meditation and following the Eightfold Path. Now, with Buddhism, you'll have Four Noble Truths. Now, with Buddhism, you'll have Four Noble Truths. The natural state of life is suffering. That means that us as humans, we are always suffering. That's just our natural state. That desire is the root of the suffering. So the fact that we may want wealth, or that we may want power, or that we want all these things that we feel will make us happy and complete, that is the root of our suffering. So in order to actually achieve this kind of like happiness or escape from this suffering, we have to let go of desire. We have to stop wanting the material things in our life, right? So in modern day, you shouldn't want that video game that you've been waiting for, right? Cyberpunk. Like, if you get rid of that desire, you won't suffer since you maybe won't get it. And that if you follow this eightfold path to relinquish desire, you'll end your suffering. That's the goal. The goal is to end our suffering in life. Now, that middle way, which is this eightfold path, is that, you have to have right understanding of others. You have to speak properly, put in good effort. You always have to meditate, be mindful of others. So it's kind of like this really being kind of in the middle. And that's essentially the Buddhist life. Now, when Buddhism migrates out of India, as you have probably seen on some of your readings in China, you'll get Mahayana Buddhism. And in that style of Buddhism, the Buddha starts to become deified. So he'll blend with some of the local cultures and ancestral veneration and that kind of stuff that happens in East Asia. And then your Buddha will take on these kind of like deified, um, divine kind of features. So the best way to kind of keep them separate. So Theravada Buddhism, which is the original Buddhism, that's the one from India, and that's your skinny Buddha with the hand raised, right? So that skinny Buddha is India. Now, big belly Buddha, that's Mahayana Buddhism, and that's the one that makes it into China and Korea and Japan and all over East Asia. Southeast Asia. So when we talk about Southeast Asia, we mean Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, basically that whole Indochina region and the Spice Islands. Things you have to remember about Southeast Asia. One, that spices are really important. They're really, really important. They have spices that can't really grow in other parts of the world, like Europe, and there will be a high demand for these spices. Hinduism and Buddhism will spread to these regions because of trade and the spice trade and people trying to get their hands on these commodities, these goods. They depended on trade for the economy. That was pretty much their main thing. It was this external trade and selling these goods to people that came. So as a result, you had a lot of these sea-based kingdoms that relied on ships coming in and taking these bulky spices and other goods to sell elsewhere. However, not all kingdoms were sea-based. Some were land-based, like the Angkor Kingdom. That was did not really rely that much on sea trade. Instead, they relied on a lot of internal trade and overland trade. And they had very complex irrigation and drainage systems that allowed them to produce a surplus in agriculture. More agriculture means you can have more people. With more people, you could also develop more economic prosperity. And as a result, they didn't have to rely entirely on sea-based trade to be prosperous in the region. So there are some exceptions, though the majority are kind of sea-based kingdoms in that southeastern region. Here's an example of Buddhism and Hinduism spreading to Southeast Asia. So here you have an Angkor. It's a temple complex. And whenever you see these kind of buildings, just know that it's, Buddhism and Hinduism is influenced them. Okay, so they made it there as a result of trade. So that's pretty much all you need to know for this South and Southeast Asia region during this time period. In your book, there'll be mention of other kingdoms and names, but the most important thing are these larger themes, and especially with India, Hinduism, and how it structures society is quite important.